Good evening and welcome to Booking Black with Gary Flowers. We welcome you this evening. We have in studio Dr. Shawn Utsey, Chair of the African American Studies Department at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Tonight's book is The Miseducation of the Negro by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And a little bit of background. Dr. Carter G. Woodson becomes the second African American man in American history and world history to graduate with a PhD in history from Harvard University, the first being W.E.B. Du Bois. Dr. Woodson took his scholarship and applied it in a very unique way. He created in 1926 Negro History Week. Many of his colleagues asked Dr. Woodson, history is history. Why would you create a subcategory of Negro history? And his answer was profound. He answered with, I intend to reinsert the missing pages of world history. And through his scholarship, became one of our brightest historians globally. The work that we will discuss this evening is The Miseducation of the Negro, written in 1932. Dr. Woodson, born and raised in Buckingham County, Virginia. Many of his experiences and his travels led him to this seminal work in world history. And so with me tonight is Dr. Shawn Utsey. Dr. Utsey, Dr. Woodson's book, to me, is a must-read for many reasons. His scholarship first, but his perspective on indoctrination versus education, I think, is fundamental. Please speak to your experiences with the book.
Yes, The Miseducation of the Negro, for me, was a transformative moment when I first encountered it and read it. In fact, I couldn't put it down until I finished the book. It's not a very thick book. And so it began me thinking about what I know, or what I think I know, and how I came to know that, right? And how that information impacts my life. And I think Dr. Woodson raised my awareness, right? That I should interrogate information thoroughly, right? Also, that information can be internalized and influence your behavior.
Let's stop right there because that's so profound. To interrogate information and then internalize what you've analyzed. Speak to interrogation of information.
Yes. I think if we're honest with ourselves, most of us know what we know because someone else decided that we could know that. So even in books, TV, the media, what our parents tell us, someone has said, this information is something you can disseminate. And so we know that information. There's information that we don't know because someone has said, let's keep this to ourselves. I think everyone knows about the Conference of Nicene where the books of the Bible were decided which ones would go in. That's profound. That means someone said, this is what you Christians should know, right? These things.
And what year was that conference, just for those who are hearing this for the first time?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And it doesn't matter as much the year, but that it was decided.
It was decided.
And the re-editing of the Bible. So when
Right.
people speak of what's in the book,
Right.
well, I say to them, which book?
Right.
Which
right.
edition?
Right.
And how many have you read?
Right. And that's profound.
It is.
That's the point that Carter G. Woodson was making, that information, right, is regulated. And that when we read, we should understand that someone has decided that this is something we should know and could know. And even though it's factual, it still has a particular lens on it.
Yes.
So when I say something or write something, it's going to have my politics in view.
Your culture.
My culture.
Cultural lens, your political lens, your educational lens.
Exactly, exactly. And so I think that Carter G. Woodson, for me, was really an awakening. And when he said that you don't have to point a Negro to the back door, because he'll find it for himself. And if he discovers there's not a back door, he'll build one, right? And this speaks to the indoctrination that Black folk have experienced in relation to European Americans and our status. And so we have to understand the result of our miseducation, right? And that our miseducation has resulted in very real behaviors that allow us to kind of function on autopilot oppression.
Such as?
Well, I gave the example about the young child who is well behaved in public because the grandmother will give him a look or mom will give him a look and he'll straighten up and he knows to behave himself in public because there'll be consequences when he gets home. This comes out of slavery in which mothers had to ensure the survival of their children, particularly their male children, by teaching them to stay out of the way, to be quiet, to be seen and not heard, to never buck authority, to never question authority, right? That's how black males survived, and the mothers taught them to survive. And this has stayed with us. And so this socialization teaches us that there are limits on pushing the boundaries, whereas the white child is allowed to kind of run buck wild with the parents' oversight and guidance, just far enough away to protect them from anything, right, that really goes wrong, but they're allowed to explore the boundaries, to push the boundaries. And as adults, you'll see this in business, right? And think about the world's two wealthiest men, Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, right? Dropped out of college, both of them. Now suppose you told your parents you're gonna drop out of college and build something in your garage. Right? They might have beat your brains out, right? That would be ridiculous. As hard as I worked, as hard as your grandparents worked to make a way for you, you're gonna drop out of college and to create something? But that's how we've been socialized, to be cautious, to not take chances, to not take risk, right? Think about all the Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerbergs we missed up on because we took the cautious route, right?
Exactly. And it's interesting that Dr. Woodson, in speaking of the dichotomy between indoctrination and education, mm-hmm. indoctrination may tell you, grow up, get a good job with benefits, marry someone, have a couple kids, keep your nose clean, keep your head down. Whereas education may say, take your skills and develop your own business, to see the world as full of possibilities. And so growing up in Virginia and matriculating through the University of Virginia, it was very poignant to me that my Afrocentric professors, Dr. William Harris, Dr. Vivian Gordon, Dr. Waldo Martin, and others, directed me to the Miseducation. Mm-hmm. And I could relate, having grown up in its capital city of Richmond, that I was always taught by the elders, mm-hmm. play it cool, mm-hmm. don't rock the boat, just keep it down. And that indoctrination formed my resistance mm-hmm. to it. And I said, I want to learn more about not only the African origin of civilization, but how has the academy mm-hmm. cognitively miseducated black people in America?
Yeah.
And Woodson answers that question.
He does. Now, what I was trying to do was to build a case conceptually that the notion of education can be problematic, yes. to begin with. What Zuckerberg and Gates did was they were trying to put themselves in situations that freed them, right? For black folks, college means something different.
Yes.
There's some degree of status striving there as well. So it's not really that you are going to finish college and be prepared, but you're going to be finish college and your parent can say, my son graduated from college. He's the first one in our family.
Or I, as a student, can now get a job.
Get a job, right.
So at the University of Virginia, I happened to be at Harvard on sabbatical in the Kennedy School of Government when Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook. Mm-hmm. But also that semester, he shut down the entire computer system at Harvard. And I remember the students buzzing around about this guy who had shut down the computer system. But he had a mission in college to do and explore what he thought was interesting.
Right.
When I was undergrad, many of white kids took courses that they were interested in, mm-hmm. knowing that they had a job and a career afterward.
Right. But here's the reality, right? It's the illusion that a job will result for yes. black people. Yes. Many times that college graduate will be making less than their father working at the post office or yes. working at the auto plant
yes.
or working at these other jobs that pay real well but don't require a college degree. The white kids who live in the suburbs working in the electrical unions, the sheet metal iron worker unions, making tremendous money,
Yes.
without a college degree, but black folks are locked out of those unions. For us, college has been the only way to transform our lives, or education, right? And so in order to get that foundation, right, education has been our gateway. But what's happened is it's not resulting in any wealth. The white families, the white immigrants who came with nothing, their children are developing wealth through membership in these unions, construction unions.
Yes.
So they're generating wealth, generational wealth.
Which historically excluded black people.
For that reason. Mm-hmm. Now we're getting education, but no wealth. So I'm not, and so this is accentuated with Zuckerberg and Gates, that they were not going to school for the sake of going to school, right? And this is the problem with black folks. We're going to school to get a job. And college was never, university was never meant to be a jobs program.
Even the word university is a global way of thinking.
Yes.
To see all of the possibilities, not to be
That's
myopic,
the point, right?
And see one job.
And that's the point. And that's the point that Woodson was making. That not only does the university experience or process misguide black folks, because we're going for the wrong reasons, it also begins to alienate us from our communities. Yeah. That was the most profound thing that I read in the Miseducation of the Negro. And it's my own experience.
Yes.
When I would go home on breaks, when I first arrived at A&T, I didn't go home for the first 2 months.
What is A&T?
North Carolina A&T. Historically black college in Greensboro, North Carolina. Yeah. I didn't go home for the first month or so, although I was going home only to Fayetteville, an hour and a half away, because I was having a good time, college life, I was feeling the autonomy of being away. But at some point, when I did go home, I realized that I didn't have much to talk about with my friends anymore, right? I'm talking about college life, campus life, Greek life. I'm talking about, all the things that college campuses offer, what happened in the CAF and, and they don't understand any of this language. Right? So my language and lexicon had changed. My worldview had changed.
And now you had to become bilingual.
I had to become bilingual. But that became very uncomfortable because my friends, I think they felt I was judging them and I felt they were judging me. Right? Even when black folks go home on break, they start correcting their parents. Mom, don't speak like that. It's not ain't, is it? And so we really began to become alienated from our folk as a consequence of our college experience, right? And many times, even at historically black colleges, we're being alienated because we're being groomed into this class structure that says that this degree is going to put me above others. If you remember the scene from Do the Right Thing, not Do the Right Thing, from School Days, it was real because we always had beef with the Greensboro dudes, right?
The townies.
Mm-hmm. At some point, that was just given. Because they had legitimate grievances. We would come into Greensboro, we had privilege, right? The local girls liked us because we were college students. And so it did create a dynamic that made us against them. And there were many fights on campus, off campus between Greensboro local folk and North Carolina A&T students.
Well, let me give you this experience. So my experience was not at HBCU, but at the University of Virginia. And so when Dr. Woodson speaks of the miseducation, it was the miseducation of white supremacy and the highest form of evolution being Europe. And in a countervailing sense, I majored in anthropology and African American studies. So now I am perceived when I come home on break from my friends at A&T as, well, you don't know about that because you go to a white school.
Yeah.
And yet I was studying more black history than they. So Woodson had me really twisted up because now I'm at a white university, taking black history, coming home to my black friends who always knew me as black, but now thinking I'm miseducated.
Yeah.
And so I had to counter challenge them. Do you know the words to lift every voice and sing? I do. Learned them at UVA. Have you studied African origins of civilization, destruction of black civilization, Egypt Revisited, or any of the, I think, essential books in black history, and yet you're judging me. So when I read Woodson, and I read it every other summer, just to refocus myself on what's important and how we can be led astray.
Right, but let me tell you a little secret. We also look down on Howard University as being the same kind of bastion of middle class white values.
And for good reason.
For good reason. But the point is that I think you're right, that my brother went to the University of Georgia. And as a consequence of being in that white environment, the black students had to be more conscious, had to be more focused. At historically black colleges like A&T, which is in the black experience, right? I had no black history courses.
And that's what I wanted to
A&T.
get to. Color me this. You are a professor, tenured professor, chair of the African American Studies Department at Virginia Commonwealth University. Why was it such a struggle for African American universities known as HBCUs to develop black studies programs?
Well, there are two reasons.
That's miseducation.
Yeah. There are two reasons. Historically black colleges were originally meant to be replicas of white universities, right? Just like the Greek sororities and fraternities were meant to be replicas of white Greek life. Mm-hmm. We simply want to be like white folks, all right? We want to have our version of white folk life. Right. And the universities were no different. Now, at A&T, because we were kind of immersed in some of the history of you know what I'm saying, that you would study somewhere else, it happened at A&T, right? The Green World Four, everybody know about them. We used to shop at Woolworths.
I didn't know about that until I studied black history at UVA.
Right.
February 1st, 1960.
Right. We knew about that because we were there, right? We knew about Willie Grimes, who got shot when the National Guard came on campus because the brothers at A&T had created a pact with the Dudley High School kid who had won the election to be class president, but the administration denied him the opportunity. It was a huge event that happened there, right? When Jesse Jackson came down as a historic runner for presidency, being an alumni, we were in the moment. Yeah. When the Klan shot 5 people in the Grove housing area, I arrived during the protests. We were in the midst of the history. So in some situations, you are the history, right? But I still think the primary reason why there was no major in African American studies when I was at A&T was because they were not interested in teaching you how to be black and understand black culture, but how to get ahead in the white world. And to their detriment, they did that. Now, Howard actually has a history of some of the early pioneers in studying black culture and black history. So it wasn't really, everything they did was about black history, black culture. Right. But I can see this more clearly when I
related to Woodson again.
Yeah. Woodson was trying to reorient us to understanding that everything we know has been constructed in a way to disenfranchise us from our contributions. Yes. And more importantly, that we buy into this and we value this, right? Our degrees become how we're defined. I remember being in grad school with other black people. They weren't in my grad school because I was the only black person in my program.
But where did you attend grad school?
I went to grad school. I got my master's degree from New York University and my PhD from Fordham University, all in New York City. And so I had a small cadre of other black doctoral students when we were in school together. That's how you had to make it through. But many of them were interested in finishing so they could be Dr. So-and-so. I mean, we'd be at 7-Eleven and they'll correct the person, it's Dr. So-and-so, right? And that became a big thing to them. For me, it lasted like a week, and it became less important about what I was called than it was about what I was doing, right? And I think that Woodson describes that process in terms of the alienation of black people from the community, from themselves, and from their families as a consequence of these status strivings. Everything black folks do, beginning in slavery, to some degree has been tied up into this notion of symbolic status striving. Yes. Many times we criticize young black folks for wearing the gold and the sneakers, right? And we talk about how a Zuckerberg or some other white person who's wealthy dresses in jeans and a hoodie because they don't have to show you how much they're worth, right? But for folks who've been denied for so long, right, there's a need to kind of present yourself as being of value. Again, the other thing that Carter G. Woodson doesn't talk about, but others like Naeem Akbar, Kobe Cambone talk about cultural misorientation. Yes. Whereby we have adopted the value system of Europeans, which suggests that your value is based on what you have, right? How many cars, how many houses, how many degrees, and I can equate that with what your value is, right? But for African people, our character is central, and that's what Woodson is alluding to. and when he talks about how we become alienated from
And
ourselves.
our wisdom.
And our wisdom, absolutely.
So the mystery systems of ancient Kemet and Nubia, and later to be called Egypt, were based on an accumulation of knowledge.
Absolutely.
So you could not become a priest,
right,
okay, in the mystery systems without reading a full law book and mastering it, full medicine book, 2 philosophy books, and the like. And so when we look at Moses, for instance, as a priest, he becomes a priest at 80 years old because it took that long to read
right.
that much information.
And priests were exalted. They were like the scholars.
And so we look at contemporary Black life. Maybe some of the fraternities and Masons still have you don't become master in a Masonic lodge unless you can memorize the entire ritual. The same thing for some fraternal organizations as well. And so there's still pockets of wisdom equates to value as opposed to materialism.
Right.
But Woodson does bring that out.
He does.
And he does so, I think, in a very interesting place, the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's his orientation. And I say to many that Virginia is ground zero for America Incorporated. And so Woodson's book becomes even more salient to us, because if we can see the origins of our indoctrination versus our education, our misappropriation of value to materialism as opposed to wisdom, that's Woodson.
Yes.
That's Virginia.
And I actually came across Woodson, a letter from Woodson. I'm a psychologist by training, and so I'm working on a documentary film on the history of Black psychology. And there's a brother named Sumner, Francis Cecil Sumner. He's the first African American to receive a PhD in psychology from an American university. Okay. He was a student of G. Stanley Hall. And so after he got his PhD in 1921 from Clark University in Massachusetts, he was looking for a job. He had applied to West Virginia State, where Carter G. Woodson was the chair.
Yes.
And so I have a letter from Carter G. Woodson to G. Stanley Hall asking about Sumner, noting that he's applied for a position. I want to find out about his character and his scholarship. It's incredible that the circles were so small, right? And that Carter G. Woodson was kind of like, had so early on become a kingmaker because of his contributions.
Yes, but he was also a cross-pollinator.
Yes.
And we sit in Richmond, Virginia, where Mrs. Maggie Lena Walker became the first African-American woman to charter and serve as president and even board chair for an American bank. It was Dr. Carter G. Woodson and Mary McLeod Bethune and W.E.B. Du Bois who visited Richmond to say, what manner of woman is this?
Right.
And so, but his work, Dr. Woodson's work at West Virginia State was phenomenal. Tell us a little bit more of how he built the department there.
Well, I'm not familiar with the specific mechanisms of how he built the department, but I know that he was central, because West Virginia State was in the context of historically Black colleges, a lot was going on there. They're also the home to the association, the National Association of Teachers, which was a Black organization of educators. And so he was responsible for a lot of soon to be renowned scholars working in education as well.
Well, his work at West Virginia State, he built the department in a very fastidious manner, attention to detail. And how is your work transformative to the society? And so in that, he was so big on institution building. And that's how he came to found the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. At that point, it was Negro Life and History. And that organization still exists. And I'm proud to say that Richmond, Virginia has just opened its first branch of Asala. And scholars around the world recognize Asala because we now know Asala beyond the life of Dr. Woodson.
Absolutely.
And so not only was his scholarship profound in his book, and I read it every other summer, Miseducation of the Negro, but his institution lives beyond it.
Absolutely.
And I think that we can learn from that. And so as we go forward, I think it's important to look at Woodson as a seminal figure in American scholarship. Many times our scholars, Black scholars, are bifurcated and put into the Black scholarship
Yes.
bucket, as opposed to one who changed the nature of society.
Yes. And in fact, I'm about to launch in the Department of African American Studies the Carter G. Woodson Academic Institute for the summer program for high school students.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
so I'm excited about that. We want to immerse these young people before they get to college, in college life. I think for me, it was very important. I had the opportunity to hang out with my brother during the summer at the University of Georgia, and so I was getting an orientation before college.
And I had the same at the University of Virginia with the summer prep program, summer preparatory program. But we too had a Carter G. Woodson Institute at the University of Virginia. And we also had the noted historian, Dr. Luther Porter Jackson. We had a Luther P. Jackson House for Cultural Affairs. And we had the Carter G. Woodson Institute for graduate students. And so that was a way of taking these scholars and putting them into a contemporary context for the note of institution building.
Yes, and it still exists at UVA.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That has grown tremendously.
Well, I want to thank you once again. Give us closing thoughts about how Dr. Carter G. Woodson impacted your life, particularly through Miseducation of the Negro.
Well, I think Carter G. Woodson instructed me to kind of interrogate knowledge, to think freely, to be aware of how education has limited me. When I finished my PhD, I realized that I was not prepared to work with Black folks because they don't teach me that in school. My real education began after I got my degree, and that degrees don't really provide you with the education or training. They provide you with credentials to access certain resources. We should be clear about that, and I'm clear about that.
And so A&T didn't prepare you to work for Black folks?
Oh, A&T did that.
But you said Fordham
and NYU did not prepare me to work with Black folks.
I got it.
A&T prepared me in ways that you can't describe, but being in and among folk, you learn proper manners, as my folk might say, right? And that's important. You can't forget where you come from, and you can't forget the use of the wisdom that we've gotten from our ancestors.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Shawn Utsey, thank you for your time. Thank you for your scholarship. And we reserve the right to bring you back.
I'd love to come
to
back.
review other books.
Thank you.
As we close this evening, you have heard Dr. Shawn Utsey, Chair of the African American Studies Department at Virginia Commonwealth University, located in Richmond, Virginia. I am Gary Flowers. You have now witnessed another episode of Booking Black with Gary Flowers. Good evening.